My name is Alex Santana. I'm the Associate Curator here at Princeton, New York, and I'm very delighted to welcome you all to this program today. We're going to get started shortly, but I'll begin just by reading the bios of our guest speakers today. Can everyone hear me okay? Yeah? Perfect. The exhibition we're standing in is called Data Consciousness, Reframing Blackness in Contemporary Print. It was curated by Tiffany E. Barber, and it's really an exploration of 6 really incredible Black artists who are thinking about data in contemporary life, new technologies, and expansive definitions of print. Here at Princeton, New York, we're all about that, experimental printmaking, expanding the medium and the discipline, and seeing how it reverberates in other disciplines. So I'll introduce Julia Mallory first, who's one of the artists in the show. Her video is on this really elegant, lovely red wall, but we'll also screen the video here. Julia Mallory is committed to being a good steward of and vessel for her ancestors' stories. As a storyteller, she works across multiple genres with a range of mediums, from text to textiles. As a creative and a grief guide, Mallory is invested in cultivating care, creativity, and community through a robust workshop facilitation practice. In 2022, as the recipient of the Black Art in America Foundation's Next Big Idea grant, Julia founded the Harrisburg Youth Arts Incubator, an experimental art-making program for young people aged 12 to 17. She is also the founder of the creative container Black Mermaids and the author of 6 books, including 2 children's books. In addition, her short film, Grief is the Glitch, debuted in 2022. And in 2024, Julia opened 1006, a community cultural gathering space that centers connection, creativity, and curiosity. Mallory is the mother of 3 children and is from the south side of Harrisburg, PA. Autumn Womack specializes in late 19th and early 20th century African-American literary culture, with a specific interest in the intersection of literature, visual technologies, and archival practice. Professor Womack is the author of The Matter of Black Living, The Aesthetic Experiment of Racial Data, 1880 to 1930, which was awarded the 2022 Modern Language Association's William Sanders Scarborough Prize. She is also the editor of Norton Library's edition of Charles Chestnut's 1901 novel, The Marrow of Tradition. Her next book, The Wanderer, investigates Toni Morrison's creative process through an exploration of her archive, and is forthcoming from Knopf. Professor Womack's research and writing has been published in journals such as Black Camera, an International Film Journal, American Literary History, Women in Performance, as well as numerous edited volumes. Her recent writing attends to the relationship between financialization, speculation, and aesthetics in the works of Charles Chestnut and W.E.B. Du Bois, who is actually here in the room with us. Although this work that you see here is called Triple Double Consciousness by Silas Monroe, one of the other artists in the show. And in this portrait, he's superimposed his own face on this really famous photograph of Du Bois in Paris. The reverse image is the actual one of Du Bois. So without further ado, we'll premiere, debut Julia's video, Press for Freedom, a collage history of data portrait number 61.
Prior to the signing of the Emancipation Proclamation, there were 40 Black newspapers in America. The first, Freedom Journal, was founded in 1827 in New York, the state's on-paper end of the peculiar institution of slavery. "73 years later, Black folks traveled to the 1900 Paris Exposition to tell the news of a people who were trying to build lives in spite of the pervasive white interference they were subject to. In their arsenal, they carried a set of data portraits produced by Atlanta University that reported on the status of their lives. This is the story of the people, places, and publications behind data portrait American Negro newspapers and periodicals. This legacy includes publications that found footing in joining forces, some of whom will not survive 1900. Publications that combine the religious with the political, championed by trailblazers in their respective fields. Papers that adopted bold design choices. While women may have been central to the operations of many of the publications, their presence is harder to locate during this period. There are papers with inventive names and bold mottos. Newspapers that represented a range of Black social and political thought. Genteel Negro. An indecent, uncleanly, boisterous Negro is as repugnant to them as he is to the most refined white man or woman. With this element, the respectable Negro holds no communication save as he comes in contact with him in his daily work. We feel certain that the breed of noble Virginians is not extinct, and when the facts are presented to them in their true light, no separate car legislation will be enacted that will humiliate respectable, well-behaved Negroes. School newspapers, including those that hailed from HBCUs, our leaders should make personal sacrifice. Papers proud of owning the sites of production and its value of the bully pulpit. In 1900, these data portraits and accompanying photographs told the news from many Black views while seeking the freedom to press on.
Thank you all for being here. Julia, thank you so much for the work, for the time. I think we're gonna talk for maybe 30 minutes or so. You'll give us a cue and then we'll open it up to conversation. So I really wanted to just begin by inviting you to talk a little bit about the practice, about what you are describing here as this kind of moving collage, right? Which I think is a really, really interesting way to think through your work in relationship to Du Bois, and Du Bois is always so interested in kind of moving data and the rhythms of Black life and the assemblage and the ensemble, and that seems to be so much a part of what you're doing with this collage movement, right, and collage aesthetic. So I wanted to hear you talk a little bit about that, and you take whatever parts of this question you want to take. The other thing that just struck me watching this time around from the audience is that there's so many of those data portraits that Du Bois assembled. And I've looked at them so many times, and for some reason, I have seen this image of number 60, but I have never noticed that it was about the Black press. Like, so there's something about like that triangular image, right, that is so striking, and it's so reminiscent of a pyramid, right? But I don't know how it's been lost on me that it was about the Black press. So I also just wanted to invite you to think about, or talk to us a bit about what it was like or how you decided to land on number 60 as the starting point for thinking about these questions, and then how your aesthetic or how your process. Take whatever you want from that, or nothing at all.
So I do want to first start by saying I did make an error. It's 61.
Either way.
Right, and I'm not sure. Okay.
Is that us or you? Is that us? Okay.
I'm not sure what we should do. So, and I hesitated to even number it because I don't know how the plates relate, the numbers in terms of the intention of the people that created them. So it is data portrait number 61. A little bit about how I get to this part of the process. Yeah. So I am a collage artist. And so that's why I refer to it as like collage cutout, because it stems from my practice as being a collage artist and the idea of like layering multiple things. My own aesthetic with regards to collage animation is a very do-it-yourself type of process. It allows me to let go of all like perfection, because sometimes you don't know what's going to emerge into, as I like to say, until you touch the material. So sometimes there's these very happy accidents that we arrive at. I also, with regards to like the animation piece, I mean, like animation literally means like to bring to life. Yeah. And so I wanted to try to show some sort of life behind what kind of exists as like facts in an archive, right? I think, and you talk about this in your book too, like even the limitations of the material in regards to filmmaking. So my aesthetic as a filmmaker anyway is very much interested in kind of a more experimental connection or representation of life, trying to get more at things that we can't always readily know. So I think that's one facet of it. Yeah. And then landing on the Black press, I thought, I'll be honest, so a couple things. One, the most practical perspective from my animation standpoint was like, oh, what might be the easiest to chop up? Quite honestly. So I was looking at each of the ones and saying, oh, what can I easily chop up, put back together? But then it was also from a perspective, well, if I tell you the story of the Black press, I'm also gonna talk to you about Black life, because as I say in the film, they represent a range of Black political and social thought and experiences. So I figured if we looked at the press, you ultimately look at the people who they represent.
Yeah. No, I mean, there's so much in that you just said. I mean, one of the things that I find so interesting is when you're talking about the subjects that you take as your film, as the subjects that you take as the subjects of your film, are more experimental, right? And so it is striking that the subject of this film is data and the press, right? I mean, we think about film and cinema as supposed to be capturing or rendering movement. And you are making still data or text move, which seems so in line with what Du Bois is always wrestling with. Like, how do we make the data move? How do we make a visual representation of Black life, which is supposed to be static and inanimate and have no life and be totally antisocial? How do we create a visual technology, really, that can render that stillness in motion. And it's just so interesting that then it becomes animation collage to bring that, to activate that very Du Boisian ethos.
Yeah, I'm like also trying to show that that even like the Black past and the Black future is not fixed.
Yeah.
And so Black folks are on the move, like in lots of ways, either socially, right, physically, spatially, but even the way people think, right? Like our ideas are evolving across a window of time. So as I was working on this project, what also struck me is I'm really intrigued by this idea of, and you talk about this in your book too, about like troubling like the notion of like the fiction or the fantasy of progress.
Yeah.
And so when looking at these papers and then thinking about how, and I say 40, but that's kind of like a data avatar, right? Because part of it is like, oh, this is what I could count.
Yeah.
Right. But then if somebody produces a paper in 6 weeks and says, oh, there was 100, that number is like changing. But I really wanted to try and demonstrate just like how much folks were going through to bring the news. And then I also mentioned in the film that like some of these papers won't even survive 1900. So I try to focus on papers that existed like between 1899 and 1900 that I also could get some sort of physical representation of from like one of the archives that exist.
Yeah. I mean, the idea of kind of troubling the notion of progress. And as I just like glanced over to your film, like one of the newspapers is called The Progress, right? And so when you're talking about the life cycle of these newspapers and how some are very long and some are very short and some were one issue and some they would be weekly and then they would be bi-weekly and then they would go to monthly. So and so thinking about the circulation patterns and thinking about the coming and going of these newspapers does seem to be a different progression of history, like with these starts and stops and fits and what we might think of as failures, but they become some part of this different kind of historical progress. I wonder if you can talk. I don't think it showed on what we saw right here, but I wondered if you could talk about the really, really wonderful quote that frames the film. And it's a quote. I think it's from Darkwater, and it's this beautiful Du Bois quote where he says, people will never fully know, right, the circumstances that, quote, worked the feeling of Black America to a fever heat. And that's the provocation that opens the film. And I just wanted to invite you to talk about that moment, that passage, and what it means to have this idea that we'll never actually know what worked the feeling of Black America. It's such a Du Boisian sentence. What worked the feeling of Black America to a fever heat? And I just wanted to hear you talk about how you landed upon that and what it means to have that as the framing text for this film.
So I was, I think the quote is actually from his autobiography, if I'm not mistaken. I pulled it from there. And the beginning of the quote, he says, "Most Americans forget," right? And so I think that I was interested in this concept of forgetting. And the other piece, like there is, like Du Bois was always, in his work, right, there's like fact, but then there's also like the feeling of those facts as they're enacted in Black life. And so I was really curious about even just like what the feeling of like freedom and progress and resistance and like just other ways of knowing. So I was trying to hint at that too, because I think that so much when we talk about like Blackness or Black film or Black representation or visual politics, sometimes it's like the expectation around like the way feelings are supposed to be portrayed. And so I don't know, I think I really just wanted to convey, I wanted that quote because again, the forgetting piece, and we're doing a project that, at least for me, is very archival heavy, and it's about how that history is also hidden. And it could just be as relevant. The other thing too, troubling the notion of progress. A lot of times when you read these things, you're like, oh, somebody could have said that last week.
Right.
You know,
Right.
it's not really exceptional in that way.
Yeah.
So I think also using that quote was like, did Du Bois say that? You know, last week, or of course, you know, since this transition, but I could have swapped out whoever said it, and you would not know that it was something that was said almost, 100 years ago.
Right. I mean, I think you're right. It does remind us, like how much Du Bois, even as he's talking about the present, he's kind of a theorist of the future, because we're kind of in this changing same for him, the historical progress that is actually about recursivity or repetition. But this idea, I love everything you've said, but two things I just want to pull out, and maybe we can think through a little bit together too, is this kind of the idea of what Black filmmaking is supposed to capture, and the fact that like the world of feelings is supposed to be so legible, or it should be representable, or we should be able to it should always be accessible, even though it's of course not. And then, what I think your film captures so beautifully is this question that Du Bois was always wrestling with. Like, what is the relationship between the world of feelings, or the emotional, or the affective, or the ineffable, and the fact? And he's like committed to both of these registers. Like in Souls of Black Folk, we get like, how does it feel to be a problem? And even in that sentence, it's the feeling and the problem, the quantifiable and the affective together. And he's like, how do we reconcile these, and do we reconcile them? And so just hearing you talk about thinking through that by way of this film, I think is also just an interesting way to think about Du Bois's larger kind of visual project. I keep going like this because it's all around us. So I don't know if there's anything in there, or we can talk about anything else.
No. Du Bois, at least in my understanding of some of the work, is like problematizing what it means to be a problem. And my own work, my own course of study as a grief worker, I'm very interested in even what I think Tari Pickens calls Black affective resistance. And so this expectation that, and I think you talk about this in your work as well, like kind of this hyper visibility and the expectation of a certain type of even performance around grief. And so so many things I want to say, so I'm trying to go back and anchor where I want to go with this. It's funny because I wrote down a quote, like people like now like to say like, oh, facts, feelings aren't facts.
That's right. Yes.
And I always like laugh at that, because I think about the concept of a lot of times, like sometimes the truth is just something that we settle on, right? And so also watching how people can manipulate our concept of a fact, right? Which is grounded in their own feelings about certain things.
Yeah.
I don't know.
That's so interesting.
There's like so much that I want to say here. So again, with like Du Bois and like always that like the fact so-called and the feeling like right up against each other. And I think, at least from what I can see, like less of an interest in that so-called like binary. I think Black filmmaking, it can do so many things. I'm very interested in like more like experimental work and like independent cinema, because I think there's like such a like a need to like quickly read what like Black film is doing or not doing. I think about the lack of sometimes just the materiality, like people. Maybe people could produce certain things if they had more resources. And I think my good friend Kalolo is here and is headed to Arthur Jafa's show at the MoMA, and one of the things he always talks about is like Black cinema is not actualized in the same way that our music is, and what would that look like? So I don't know. I'm just really interested in all these.
Yeah. No, and I think, I mean, one of the things when I think about an experimental Black cinema, and in my book I talk a lot about it by way of Zora Neale Hurston and think of her as like a progenitor of experimental Black cinema. And I think Du Bois actually is a theorist of Black cinema, even as he's not producing films, because he's always thinking about kind of movement and capture and how do you push against or work at the limits of a technology, right? How are you always pressing at the limits of that technology? That is not supposed to render you visible as a dynamic life, right? And so when I think of some of the work that experimental cinema does, that's always kind of what comes to my mind, pushing the medium to its limit. And I think one of the things when you talk about like what music can do that film hasn't actually actualized yet when it comes to trying to register the rhythms of Black life, I think it's because we've had a hard time, or making cinema do that rhythmic work, but I see your film doing that, right? Like your film is so about capturing a particular kind of rhythm, right? And through the movement of the collage pieces, right? And you're pushing the medium to its limit by making these still images move, right? Or like taking this data portrait and really blowing it up essentially. Like you're opening it up and you're like, what are the facts behind the facts? What happens if we make this data portrait actually move and give us all of this data within it. So yeah, just thinking about that, the working at the limit of the form and pressing at what they should and shouldn't be telling us. I think it's just, I have a great view because I can like look at the film right here too.
You can get it. Right, so everything like you can always.
Yeah, but no, you're making these static images, right?
Yeah, because this is also like technique-wise, this is all paper. So it's all paper and it's all paper and pictures.
Which is like not what we think of as being the subject of cinema, right?
Right.
Like paper and cinema, even that, right? You're like pushing both of these mediums to their limit and then producing something so exciting about how we might think about and see Black life moving too.
Yeah, I don't know, with this with Black cinema and trying to, like there's so many different approaches. I think even like filmmakers that are trying to push the limits and test the limits. And I think there's a lot that's happening around Black film culture that isn't always mainstream. And so as a film festival person, like, you know, there's always all these great films that are really testing the limits of what cinema can do. And I think there's a film that it debuted at Sundance this year, but just had like a very limited theatrical release. Black News by Khalil Joseph.
Yeah, he's doing interesting things with like juxtaposition.
And kind of a very like montage type of. But also in that film, it's called Black News, but also really the idea of what is a fact. Right. There's kind of a lot of. I'm also a speculative fiction writer, so like testing the limits too of just even what story can do. Because I believe that. I mean, we just can't know everything. You know? And so what do we, like some things we just can't know because of limitations of knowledge, time, space. And then sometimes we don't know things because people don't want us to know things.
Right. And
So-
no, that's so right. And thinking about, the data, it's supposed to be predictive, right? Like that's the thing that data is supposed to do is give us a sense of what's to come. But again, I think just thinking about what the data can't tell us, and maybe Du Bois coming up against that limit too. I wanted to, Alex, how are we on time? Okay.
That went really fast.
Okay, so one of the things that's really interesting that comes up in the film is when you are narrating from, I don't know if it's editorial or something from the newspaper, right? And it's like, if they have the right facts, they will do something better. They'll know better, right? If only they had the right facts, then they would know that we shouldn't be in a segregated train car or something like that. Right? And yeah, I just wanted to maybe if we could talk about like and I think it's what we have been talking about, and it goes back to what you just said about kind of the limits of the facts, what these what the facts can't tell, what stories the newspapers have to tell. And there is a way that many of these Black newspapers were so bound up in particular kinds of like respectability politics and particular kinds of narratives about Black life, what it should and shouldn't be, right? They're also very instructive and didactic. And so, yeah, I want to just hear how you worked around kind of the politics of some of these newspapers and
Yeah, no, I think, I mean, nothing there surprised me, right? Like, I mean, like I said, they represent a range of Black thought, and the reality is that, I mean, I think the project is still ongoing, right? Because I think even when we talk about representational politics, a lot of times it's this idea that if folks could just see us in a certain kind of way, then they would, like, thinking about kind of, like how Black death is on a loop, right? And so the idea used to be that like, oh, people don't have enough for proof. And so I'm always like kind of thinking about, like several years ago, I started saying like, what's proof in an anti-Black world, right? And so like, there will never be enough of proof for folks who are just not interested in doing something different. So I think the information in the papers to me just really kind of represented very facets of life. I think some of our respectability has gotten more sophisticated, right? So we won't come right out and say that. We won't come right out and say, hey, like we don't think those other Black folks, like they're undignified. Like don't put us with them, right? But it just kind of reminds me of the way people be like, oh, Black people are not a monolith. But they usually only say that when they're trying to get away from ideas of Blackness that they think is beneath them. It usually only comes up in conversation when people are trying to do that. So I think we just got more sophisticated in our respectability, but so I think working around it or anything, it just was like, oh, it just is what it is.
Right.
And then also not shocking because I already, knew some of that. But I think it is interesting too, to just, you still when you're just like, oh, literally making an appeal, to a certain type of invisibility or desirability, I would say, too. It's always interesting to see.
Yeah. And like what kind of lives or experiences are worthy of being rendered in particular kinds of data or print, I think is also the other interesting part of it.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah. Should we open it up, Alex?
Yeah, absolutely. Any questions from the audience? Also start it off. My question had to do, Julia, when you were working on this video, you mentioned that there were kind of like a lot of unseen factors that made you think about the idea of like speculation and you being a fiction writer and kind of like inserting your own narrative. And we talked a little bit about like when there isn't a fact that maybe you can kind of insert some kind of speculative fiction there that does something for the project. And you also talked about the women who might have worked at these presses and like they were kind of absent from what you found in the archive, and so you inserted them. And like I wonder if you could talk more about that, and then if that's something that you also talk about in your book, Autumn.
Yeah, I think, it's always, the archive always has a limitation just because for obvious reasons, sometimes people are just racist and they don't think that those people are worthy of being included. Sometimes it's literally a matter of materials just were not preserved, or a fire happens, or they're sitting somewhere in a basement and haven't been digitized. So sometimes it's just, you just cannot put your hand on a material. With regards to women, the thing that I did find interesting is, we're talking about a time in life where people are absolutely known by, their Mrs. like so-and-so, not even using their first name, like maybe just using their husband's name. So trying to find out even what the hell people's name, what is this woman's real first name, she's, in the paper, she's Mrs. George Henderson. Okay, well, like, I don't even know this person's first name, So trying to locate those examples could be a little challenging as well. And just like I said, some of the papers maybe only put a couple issues out. Some of them just don't exist, anymore. So that was one of the limitations for sure. But trying to imagine, you kind of look at this is what the Times was kind of common in that era and try to figure out what from there? I hope I answered like some of what you asked.
Oh, totally.
Kind of following up, I think on the diverging from the topic, I just became very curious about what you said, that some women only know about from the Native husbands. I'm just a little bit curious about that. I'm originally from Bois, and that's something I observed there. And that maybe until like maybe 50 years ago, that's how I didn't know the names of women like friends of my grandmother. It was, the line white. So I'm just curious. I was curious to compare that to, the reality here. Like when was that a common thing? Like which year? Is that something you can share or really diverging from the topic here?
No, and I will indulge the question a little bit because it gives me a chance to speak to something else I would like to say. So I'm not 100% sure when the practice became less common. Like I can't put a year on it, right? But the other thing that I also would say that's interesting about even like Black women that were working on the papers, I don't want to also render them as like not having any type of like autonomy or. A lot of these women, there's certain social practices that people participate in, but it doesn't always give you the full picture of just how incredible and dynamic that they are, and even the people around them recognize them to be. So I also don't want to flatten that reality too, even though I was just saying that it's just hard to kind of find them because of some of that. And just depending on where people kind of like fall in and out of history too, right? So some people might have been considered more important, so there might be more information on them. Maybe working on the paper might have been one of the significant things, and then we can't find them for another 50 or 75 years until somebody comes along and finds more information, and then we rediscover people.
Yeah.
So I think in history it happens all the time.
Yeah, and it reminds me, of something that you've talked about in this conversation. I think that's something that's also at work in your film. It has to do with the lives that are deemed worthy of in the historical record, right? Like the lives that arrive to certain kinds of ideas of who counts as a subject worthy of remembering or worthy of recording, right? And Du Bois had a problem with this too. Like when he was doing all his research for the Philadelphia Negro, he was like paralyzed in the face of unmarried women. He's like, I don't know what to do with them. Like, I don't know how to account for them. I don't know how to count them. I don't know they always end up in footnotes for him. He can't figure out how to fit them into a statistical chart. And it's interesting that when he gets to the Atlanta data portraits, which are 3 or 4 years later, he does away with all of that kind of really specific enumeration around gender and class and marriage, and is interested in a different kind of visual rendering. So I don't know, it just reminds me of kind of these lives that can't be accounted for, that we have to look in other places
in
for.
These nice, neat categories.
Yeah.
Even like I'm thinking on my insurance forms, they still were are you single or married? And it's like, there's a whole lot of things in between.
There's a whole lot in between there. Right.
I had a question. I feel like you just have given me so much to think about, and so it's interesting because I was recently looking through an archive, and I was exploring a lot of Black fashion magazines from the 60s and the 70s, and noticing how political they were, and how and I don't know, something about what you had said, I can't remember what exactly it was, but it was making me think of the diffusion of knowledge through beauty, and how so many of Du Bois's models to represent information were just so beautiful and intriguing to look at.
Yeah.
And that's something about, I'm just so curious about past Black newspapers and presses and perspectives, because I think there's something about being Black in this country where almost inherently you have to have a certain knowledge of the law in order to survive, especially once you start getting deeper and deeper and closer to enslavement. And I think something about our modern times are almost way too devoid of that. And so I'm just curious for you, when you were exploring this project, did you learn anything new, or witness perspectives, or just anything from a past time that made you think, oh, we need to get back more closer to there, or that's something to learn from, or something to remember?
don't know. I think I'm just really invested in this idea that so much has already been done before, to be quite honest. Looking at the design and style choices, so when you just look at the way some of this art was rendered, the papers, logos, and things like that, it's just like, oh, like people have been in their design bag. Like this aesthetic thing around Black life and representation is not new. It's just been rendered obsolete by people who just don't want to engage with it. But I think a lot of it, even when we talk about like even how the data portraits themselves, at the time period that they emerge, they predate a lot of things that were thought to be novel and innovative and groundbreaking. They were already doing that in Atlanta when they came out. So I think like Black life has been like trying to merge the brutal and the beautiful at the same time. And so I don't know. I think those two things are like really right up against each other. Hey, good.
So, it's funny, I'm trying to formulate in my head, just why I'm so quiet, is trying to figure out how I would articulate what it is I want to say. So there's three things, and the first two aren't necessarily questions, they're just more so like statements or just comments and suggestions, because I like the idea of feelings aren't a fact thing, right? Because like facts aren't facts. Like facts aren't facts insofar as we agree on that thing.
Exactly.
Otherwise, I can disprove it, that's no longer a fact. It's like the idea of that to me is always kind of fascinating. Because it relies on us, consenting on this, agreeing that this is something that is mutually explored. But so I thought that was interesting as a point of entry for an argument. But also, thinking on Du Bois and his book, The Souls of Black Folks, and this idea of being a problem, like the Black subject being identified as a problem. Like the idea of anything being a problem depends on contextual dictation. Meaning, I have to affirm, you're a problem to my life. I am dictating the terms of that agreement. Dictating the terms of your engagement, or the impact that your presence in a society impacts, the kind of natural societal fabric of that society. And I thought that was interesting when I saw your video, thinking about the Blacks that moved to Paris, to see an exposition. And are they problems in that context, and then you think about that in relation to someone like James Baldwin, who went to Paris in a self-imposed exile. So is he a problem there, or, because again, in Du Bois' book, he was perceived as a problem. He literally says, I didn't know I loved him. It's weird to be negotiate that space. It's all dependent on relativity. But then also to the part about women and being identified by their husbands and their last names, which is interesting because there's one woman in particular in history that I think kind of almost overpowers that, and that's Harriet Tubman. Harriet Tubman, she wasn't born Harriet Tubman. She had a husband. She that came from William Tubman, right? But yeah, and so it's this idea of her actions, the way history framed her, kind of almost saw her as this liberatory figure, but not necessarily as a woman who had a paternal instinct or maternal instinct, or she was a warrior woman, and not the kind of historical narrative that circulates around her, so to speak. And I also think and that's more the question is, do you think that is it the action and the history and the context, and does the context for a woman's ability to be seen have to be so egregious that they evaporate other parts of the identity in order to acknowledge that. Think about someone Madam C.J. Walker, or they had these acts that were oftentimes in opposition to something so horrible that this woman now stands as this figure, not just a woman. You know what I mean? And that to me comes from a certain type of patriarchal lens of legitimacy. It's you can't just be a woman to do these things. You need something horrible to fight against, and then you need to also, accomplish something. All right, is this also something that may have reoccurred throughout, the archive, seeing how, patriarchal systems eradicate the kind of holistic picture of a person, and maybe they don't know them by their husband's last name, they're just Harriet Tubman. I knew as a child, and so I was maybe 29, I didn't think about Harriet Tubman in any other context. I was no, she saved people. That was the extent of her value, in my imagination, right?
So I think, no, I know some of what you're saying definitely is beyond what I'm representing in the film, but I am curious about the concept of context matters, right? And that's what happens a lot of times now. I think online there'll be important information or facts, and then they get decontextualized, and so then people kind of run with it, and now we have all types of like weird misinformation out in the world because the context of the time period is not honored. The other thing that I think Black women's existence in the archive in a certain type of way is just an extension of the way Black figures in history are exceptionalized anyway. So you kind of get the singular Black exceptional figure that is not tied to a community, right? That is not tied to other people organizing with them, that is not tied to even having a Black husband who gets it and is right there with you being a Garveyite. Like there's, Rosa Parks, I'm thinking. So I think it's no different, right? Because a lot of times, that's why I think I'm also very curious about all the information that exists around the time of the newspapers, because this idea of the lack of progress, right? It's like Black folks have been doing a lot of stuff in this country for a really, really long time and are emerging from communities that support them, that sustain them, that feed them, like when they're out of money. Like, it's not just, just the one Martin Luther King Jr. or a single Malcolm X. Like, these people are grounded in communities that are also teaching them, right? That are saying, hey, we're giving you this game, go forth and take it and do something with it. They're not just by themselves. So Black women, I think, being the lone representation of a moment is no different than everything else, the way that our history is represented.
I was wondering if those women or those individuals, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, whoever, if the idea of them being branded as symbols, so to speak, and the symbol idea of occupying the space of the symbol becomes much more easier to want to take you down. Because we don't need anything but in the context, like your leader or community. We know that you can do the thing that can shift that community's paradigm. Right? It's like that, to me, I think it's kind of interesting where you start thinking about like that person is a little different than like the thing of the masses, so to speak.
Of course.
And that's the threat to like this kind of like, I don't know, historical system, so to speak. I don't know where I was going with that. But I appreciate your response.
No, thank you for your thinking through this with me.
I want to expand the conversation about what you two were saying and thinking about data, but also you talked about Garveyites and the women behind Garvey, right? The Cheneys, right? They had whole lives, whole lives.
Yeah.
And Blacks saw all of these points of entry that we know are discarded is rooted in these two Amy's. And so you think, jump forward, now we have people rallying around this new publication, The Black Swan, right? And so talking about how time and space is not linear, we know it's not, right? So women are behind everything. Women are the originators of everything, but yet gets consumed and hyper-consumed in ways that, I'm talking about evaporation, compress and kind of redistribute how we learn and how knowledge is gathered and reassembled and put out there. So thank you for this amazing animation that you created for us to enjoy.
Thank you. Were you going to say something?
Yeah, I think that's more some comments from me too, yeah.
All right.
You want to take one more question, and
Okay.
then we have coffee in the lobby, so we can all continue talking.
Okay. Susan, you want to go?
So, thank you for the presentation. It was really, really good. And I just wanted to ask, because the feeling part is so important, a kind of more personal archival question. I mean, archives are places where you know what feeling. When you work in the general, I do, it's people who did it. So, can you talk some thing about the feelings you had and how that worked into your presentation of and the truth in the way we're using truth here, which is that it's a very connection.
I mean, I'm a deep feeler. I think it's my Cancer moon. So, I don't know, you're just like looking at people's lives, the perseverance, you know, so deeply ingrained in Black life, and you know, a lot of the data portraits, right, they're rooted in so-called, you know, Georgia Negroes, and I come from Alabama and Georgia people, and you know, I think about just like trying to translate, like in my bio that Alex read, like being a good steward, right? Connecting to that feeling and saying like, this is important. Didn't see it so much in like the Du Bois data portrait, images that accompany the data portraits, right? Because there's like I think almost, what was it, like 500 or something images that accompany the data portraits when they went to Paris. But one of the things working in the archive, I just, I do like an annual calendar for one of my brands. And this year I was like, oh, I'm gonna focus on, I don't know, there was this woman, a Black woman in Florida. There's an archival image of her, like she caught like 3 sea bass or something. And I've just been intrigued by that image. And I was like, oh, maybe all the pictures in the photo, the calendar this year will feature Black people and animals or some sort of animal life. But when you start reading some of the captions, like some of these captions that people are titling these images, these photographs, is like, I mean, sometimes very disparaging, just outright racist. So there's a lot of feeling that comes up in like touching the material of people's lives, acknowledging the limitations, and just also thinking like what became of these lives. Right. You know, because if people just drop off, you're like, oh, okay. Yeah. The one gentleman, feeling, particularly in relationship to this film. So you remember there's the picture of the man like flying the airplane, and he's dragging the tag that says "Buy Black Newspapers." So that gentleman is McCann Stewart, and he was an attorney. Sort of the newspaper, you know, various states of financial precarity. Oh, bless you. But he ended up, at some point, taking his own life. And I don't know, like, if there's, you know, the limitations of knowing, like, if he had other types of, like, mental health struggles. Was it because of the failure of the newspaper? Like, there's all these things. So people were making, like, incredible sacrifices. So I used that particular image, too, because, I mean, one, it was available. And I'm always thinking about, as an animator, what can move, and so that was like an easy one, but it was like one of those stage portraits, like the backdrop, you know, and it's a happier time, him and his family, and this is really cute picture of them. So I just wanted to kind of incorporate that continuous movement, right? That even though he's kind of like, you know, he doesn't get to the end of the newspaper's life, so to speak, but he is still very close. As one of the early folks, you know, with the newspaper. So there's a lot of feeling attached to doing this type of work.
You feel I mean, just from hearing what you're saying, I know I feel this way when I do archival research. You feel like you get so close to these people, and you spend so much time with them. And it's a different kind of relationship. I was also thinking, there's so many Black newspapers, and especially in that time period from Civil War to 1900, where it was like thousands. I mean, there's so many issues. Like the Christian Recorder was like putting those issues out every week, and those were like 20-page issues, and there was a ton of material and so many names and events, and I imagine it was also kind of overwhelming or feeling.
Yeah,
like
definitely had to figure out
like
where to land. Yeah, for sure.
Which is a different way of thinking about the archive, as it's like abundant space around Black life. We always think of it as kind of scarcity or lack, right? But the Black press is this like abundance of.
Yeah, I mean, there's already a book like if this project, let's say, is like 1899, 1900 focus, there's a book I think that came out like 1870-ish, 1888 or something like that.
The Black Press book.
Yeah, like literally already talking about
yeah.
the value of
Yeah.
the Black press, and
Yeah.
it's like all these people that are already doing this work.
It's a lot.
So troubling the notion of progress. I'm just so intrigued by that because it's like, yo, Black people like already had all these newspapers, all these periodicals, all these weeklies, hundreds of years ago.
Yeah, and that's like a different
And
kind of
even like while
yeah.
slavery is still going on, right before the Emancipation Proclamation, people were already invested in this project. So, okay.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.